Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of the Dr. Will Show, where I interview educators and entrepreneurs on leveling up. Each episode, I bring in someone who's dope, and we just sit back and have a conversation on what it means to live your best life. Now, if this is your first time checking out the podcast, this is the Mobile University for Entrepreneurs, and I'm your host, Dr. Will. Now, today's guest is someone that I started following. She works for this education, with this nonprofit that covers educational issues. And I've been looking at her feed and the information she's posting. She did a couple of photos too, some other Ethiopians. I was like, look, I'm kicking it. And I thought she was really interesting, and I wanted to bring her on to share her gems, her thoughts about how do you live a life of greater purpose, and get her take on some issues dealing with education and Black children. So for those who will be listening in the future on Apple Podcast, where there's no more iTunes people, so Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Simplecast, will you please introduce yourself, Mimi Woldeyohannes?
Thank you. Hey, y'all. Mimi Woldeyohannes here. I am currently at the 74. I'm the Special Projects and Community Manager. And just like Dr. Will mentioned, we are an education media outlet. We focus on K through 12 news, education news. And so it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.
Well, thank you for coming on. You know, I'm always surprised that folks say yes. You know, I'm not Oprah. So when I reach out to people, say, hey, will you come on? And they say yes. I'm always like, oh, let me book this where they say change their mind. I got to get this popping. What some people may not know is that you were a classroom teacher. So what did you think that you would be doing when you were growing up, and what drew you to education?
So that's a great question. I remember when I was in fourth grade, I told my fourth grade teacher that I admired so dearly that I wanted to become a teacher. I was really inspired by her. She was strict, but she was also very loving. So she had that tough love going on, and I appreciated that. However, she told me very quickly that teachers don't make enough. So that is unfortunately still the reality for many folks who are still in education. And that obviously prompted me to look into alternative paths. Afterwards, I was, always interested in law. I know I would always get into debates with my friends about just challenging norms, and then just kind of questioning why things were the way they are, specifically with like gender norms and all the stereotypes that we happen to abide by. So I was like, maybe law is the way to go, to just kind of like get more involved with social justice and human rights. Then I also realized that law school was not for me. So I studied political science instead in college, and kind of just went on that path towards, social justice work, and eventually came across TFA because they were doing some heavy recruitment on my college campus, as they do on most college campuses nowadays. And that kind of was like my first introduction into education reform, and really just like looking into education more seriously. And then I went on a civil rights bus tour my last year in college. And that was one of the most illuminating experiences for me in regards to getting more, acquainted with Black history and culture. I grew up in an Ethiopian household, so like was very far removed from like American Black history, but this experience allowed us to go through the Deep South. So you're talking about like Arkansas and Alabama. We went through Louisiana. We went through a couple of plantations. The most, impactful stop on that tour was when we went to the Mississippi Delta. We visited this place called the Sunflower Freedom County Project, and it was founded by 3 Teach for America Corps members. So that was like another touch point with TFA. And that was when I was really just shocked by the state of education in the community and like in the state in general. And I was immediately just intrigued by the idea of like how our education system lagged so far behind, and how we were failing most of our Black and brown kids. And it was at that point where we had an opportunity to interact with students and family members that were in the community. And I was, very struck by their sentiments about education and like the things that the center was doing to really help change that narrative and really inspire people to do better and to do more. So that was kind of like my green light, like go ahead and apply for TFA and go for it. And I did that. So here we are.
Wow. And so you just mentioned growing up in an African household, specifically Ethiopian, and then getting this experience. So, and I mentioned how I want to ask you about this. Growing up with that African identity, that Ethiopian identity, and you're here in America, and right, so you're
coming to America,
and you're seeing, Black people here, and engaging conversation, hanging out, friendships, working with people, etc. And we, for some reason, I still do not understand the chasm between people from the continent and Black folk from this country. What has been, I guess, your experiences with living in that world? Because, I know where you come from, but when you're walking down the street, no one is looking at you and saying you are not like Black from this country.
You'd be surprised. I actually get that a lot, but
that's awesome.
Yeah. But the grander narrative is definitely
that's awesome. But people can I guess go.
It's definitely in the region that I am in.
You're different. How's that experience like, and how, if any, did your experience or your thought process changed after you did that trip to the South and got a better understanding of the experiences of Black people in this country?
Yeah, I mean, my lived experiences are very different from a lot of my Black counterparts, and it comes out all the time in the conversations that we have about Black culture and the things that I may or may not be knowledgeable of. And some people, want to say you're not Black enough. And some people may say you're not African enough. And I've always struggled with identity. But to me, I'm very happy with who I am and where I am. And I'm always willing to learn about all sorts of cultures. And I think, I think the most important thing to be mindful of is being Black is not monolithic. We come from beautiful cultures and beautiful lines of history that we're still trying to understand. And I think we have to do our due diligence to kind of just make sure that we are reading up on our history and making sure that we're also educating those who are coming after us. And when most people look at me, they see that I do look different, and I'm happy to let them know, hey, I'm from the birthplace of humanity. It's East Africa, Ethiopia, look it up. And I'm really proud of the rich history, but I also think that the way that I grew up was just so sheltered. And so if a lot of Africans that grew up on the continent would tell you, once they come here, the way that the media has shaped the narrative about Black people, especially with the media that they get there, is just so destructive. So they come here thinking believing all the stereotypes about Black people, and it's actually quite disheartening. And so I've always had to educate my people, my family about hey, this isn't the reality. The media, who's obviously owned by, predominantly white folks, it's just they're going to skew the stories, and you're only going to get one side, and you're not going to get the truth is not always going to be there. So I think it's really about dismantling the myths and making sure that our people are seeing what is real. And so being on that bus tour was really, like I said, illuminating for me, because there were so many things that I believed, and there were so many things that I was taught, and there was also a lot that we weren't taught. And I only was able to get that experience through the people that we talked to, the people that marched, the people that are still to this day on the Hill lobbying for equal pay and just, other social justice issues and initiatives. And so it was really inspiring to be a part of that and get that firsthand experience of, being Black in the Deep South, or being Black in America is just so nuanced. And there is a lot to read up on and a lot more to discover.
Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't meet. There were two kids. I guess I grew up in went to high school with who were from the continent, Nigeria,
Mm-hmm.
but we didn't interact beyond like a hey, what's up. But when I went to Tougaloo,
Yeah.
then that was different because I was able to see that. And I remember my favorite professor, Dr. Olibode from Nigeria. I can't believe this man knew my name. I fell asleep in his 8 o'clock class.
It's his job. They better know your name.
Fell asleep in the 8 o'clock class. I'm just saying, it's a professor.
You would be both.
And it's just like a whole bunch, people. And so I'm falling asleep in this auditorium, and the man just looked up at me. He's like, Willie Davenport, why are you sleeping in my class? You need to get sufficient rest. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this man knows me.
You're not wrong.
So never fell asleep in this class again. But he was one of my, favorite professors in political science classes. And he was dope. And for then, it was like, from that experience and, also already being at an HBCU and then, having a chance to interact and get to know, Africans from the continent, and then going like, wow, like we are not that far removed as some may think we are. And I'm just wondering, like, are we going to ever get it together to where we ourselves can say, look, we need to understand that we are a part of a single fabric. I understand that there are some cultural differences, but
exactly,
we should, as much as possible, learn from one another and rebuild those relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember that, there are more things that unite us than divide us. And I think we should actually be looking at like the big, like the grander picture. And it's not us, it's not each other. It's like the white supremacist, society that we still happen to live in, no matter where we're at in this world. So it's just kind of like, which battle do you really want to fight here? It shouldn't be with one another.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So I want to talk to you about gifts. I saw this video where Steve Harvey talked about how people need to focus on one's gift. And he said, your gift is the one thing that you do the best with the least amount of effort. What is your gift? And how are you aligning your gift with your calling?
I think, I consider myself to be a spiritual person. So like, I think this answer is also going to be connected back to my faith, but I feel like we've been placed on this earth to be a light and to make sure that we're, inspiring ourselves to do better and then also inspiring others to do better. And I think my gift has been to really empower others to like use their voice. So if you have, like if you have a cause that you believe in, like I want to make sure that I'm supporting you to make sure that your cause gets the platform it deserves. If you are interested in pursuing a passion project or something like that, I want to be able to, empower you to continue, to push that out and make sure that the world sees that. And I've always felt inspired by the mentors who like pulled me up in the way in moments where I was discouraged or maybe just completely disillusioned and had no idea what I should have been doing or what I needed to do. And they empowered me. And so I think that like that's something I wanted to pay forward and empower others by telling their stories on our platform. And making sure that, like we are advocating or effectively and appropriately advocating for those who are not often able to advocate for themselves. Not to say that I don't like to use that phrase, like be a voice for the voiceless or anything like that, because I believe in sharing the mic. I think everyone should have an opportunity to voice their concerns and make sure that they have the platform to do so.
So I'm all in on ownership and believe that is one of the missing keys to Black liberation in this country. recently there was this article that went out that said Jay-Z is now $1 billion black man.
Shout out to him.
And, Robert Smith, another
Yes.
$1 billion black man,
Oh,
went viral when he told the brothers at Morehouse during his graduation address, I'm paying for all y'all student loans. Y'all gonna graduate. Y'all gonna be debt free. I was like, wow. I almost want to send him.
I was like, if he's listening to this podcast, hit me up, please.
Help a brother out. I got some.
Or Jay-Z for that matter.
Yeah, I got some doctoral loans I need to get rid of.
Right?
So when you hear the word ownership, what comes to mind, and what are the rules of success you live by?
Yeah, ownership is synonymous to power and freedom, liberation. Like that. I know that's exactly what you just referenced, and I think it really allows you to kind of determine what kind of life you want to live. So when you have the power to choose, you get to dictate what kind of like the quality of life you're going to have. And I think this could be very practical in, whether it's owning a home or a car or college degree. It could also be things that are not so tangible, like happiness and like identity. And I think those are the things we should also be very mindful of, because we're not always taught by society. And I think, you should really be kind of more mindful of like, are you here to work on this planet, or are you here to be, happy and successful and joyful? So owning your happiness is something I really believe in. And when I think of ownership, that's part of what comes with it as well. Rules of success. I have a lot. So one of the main things that I think I've always tried to remind myself of every year when I'm doing like resolutions or goals for myself, I'm always thinking about being intentional. Like those are two simple words, like be intentional, that can, really apply to every area and element of your life, like whether it's with finances or with your spiritual walk or professionally or personally with relationships. I think the more intentional you can be, the more I think the happier and the more successful you can be too. If you're aligning your actions with your purpose, that is to me like the ultimate definition of success. So being intentional. And my other rule is leading with empathy. I don't think we have enough leaders who do that. And this can be, someone who is leading a nonprofit, or it could be a boss at a local business. But we need more leaders, policymakers included, to be more empathetic, and to really have the ability to kind of just put yourself in that other person's position, even in moments where you don't want to. But like that is the way that we have the opportunity to change the world. And I think grace, leading with grace, is also aligned with that too. We I think have been shown grace countless times, and whether or not we want to admit it, it's definitely something we have to be able to pay forward to.
So things are changing now with folks sort of graduating from college with, a lot of debt, and may not be finding the jobs they were expected to, or, landing that job and not having security in it. But it's been sort of told with, this is how you achieve the American dream. You get some good grades, you go to college, you get a job, some benefits, and you're able to live a certain life. What are some of the life lessons you've learned along the way that have continued to propel you forward?
Too many to count at this point. But I will say one of my favorite books that I've read was called Start With Why by Simon Sinek, I believe is his last name. And that book has been so impactful on my life because it always grounds me in why I'm doing what I'm doing. And this is more so professionally, but sometimes it does apply personally too. And in this case, with me, obviously, like I have a background in education and I'm still working in education, nonprofit sector right now, but I'm not doing this for the money, clearly, or else I wouldn't be at a nonprofit. I'm not doing this for, to please my parents, because they don't necessarily always understand what I'm doing. They still sometimes think it's, volunteering or like doing something for the public that doesn't always make sense to them, but it's really for my students. Like that was what inspired me to get involved in education in the first place. And that's still what inspires me to stay involved, because I know until they get the education that they deserve, I'm not going to sit down and be quiet. You will still be hearing me advocate on their behalf. And I think like that reminder of like remembering your why is just so imperative in whatever you're doing. And that keeps me grounded. Another lesson that I've learned was like, we always talk about like having a seat at the table, like making sure that you're there and all that stuff, which is great. But change is not going to come if you have a seat at the table and you don't use your voice. Like there are plenty of folks that I have seen in that room where they could advocate and make decisions that will have, positive impacts on, generations to come, but they're not using their voice and they're sitting there and being seen and not being effective. And I think like this unfortunately still continues to happen. And so I want to make sure that, we're not only saying have a seat and then inviting people to the table, but we're also saying like, use your voice. You have it for a reason. And I think lastly is just thinking about having, I guess this is more specific to education, but I guess you can apply it to other areas professionally too. But I think like bringing back humanity in the work that we do, like once again, like empathy. And I think understanding that what we do has an impact on our surrounding communities. And so making sure that we're humanizing the work that we do essentially to really inspire another generation of change makers and leaders and more compassionate and empathetic people.
So some folks they're just working a 9 to 5, and some folks are living their best life.
At least that's what they think.
Wow. What is the work that your inner voice is telling you that you have to do?
I mean, this was it's a hard realization, but I mean, leaving the classroom for me was probably one of the most challenging things I've done to this point. I still low-key feel kind of guilty, but I do know that like the thing that I wanted to really tackle was beyond the four walls of my classroom. It was beyond the school. It was beyond the community. And I thought that, leaving the classroom would allow me to give me that objective perspective that I needed to really tackle on some of these equity issues within education and just in policy at a larger scale. But, I think my inner voice is always going to say, do something that allows you to work with kids directly. Even if it's not like my traditional 9 to 5, like finding other opportunities that will allow me to like either tutor or do like run an after school program or something like that, that'll help keep me grounded and really remind me of, once again, my why, which is my students. So it's, I love what I'm doing now. I love that I get to offer platforms to other people to tell their stories that have often gone undercovered and overlooked. But I think, making sure that you remember what brought you here in the first place is super imperative.
So we live in a very, digital world where everything is just Instagrammed and
podcast.
Yes. And we're seeing other people out there living lives that you could go, wow, I want to go to Barbados, or that dish
That's
looks
nice.
tasty on the plate.
Yeah.
And we, are getting caught up in sort of comparing our lives to what we are seeing online.
Yeah. And it's just getting worse with the, kids and definitely the generations that are coming after us.
So what has been your process for gaining clarity in your life? And how does someone sort of cut through all of the noise and influences they're seeing to actually embrace their own truth?
It's definitely challenging. I'm not gonna lie, especially being a millennial. Like you feel like you always have to stay on, and it's really like frowned upon to unplug. But obviously, like self-care is a new trend that has definitely emerged more so in the like past couple of years, and I think that's something I've certainly taken to heart. So in the moments I feel overwhelmed or just confused or disillusioned, whatever it may be, like I pray for clarity and discernment. I think that always my faith has always kept me grounded and sane, to say the least. And then I also try and go back to my values. And I think like that's something we don't often do enough of. And maybe it's because we haven't really wrote them down. It kind of seems a little cliche to say like, oh, like, let me take time to write down my values. But I know that's certainly some practices I've learned through, Teach for America and some of the other things I've been involved with. But really aligning yourself to what, you truly value helps bring that clarity back into your life. And it does help keep you grounded as well. So I think that's certainly an exercise that's been pretty impactful for me. And then I'm also a believer in eliminating the things in your life that don't help you evolve. Sometimes that means people. Sometimes that means technology for a little bit. If you have to unplug, and I've deleted some apps and then re-downloaded them whenever I felt like I was in a better headspace. But sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you got to block people. And there's nothing wrong with protecting your peace and your energy. I honestly think that like you have to make sure you're your best self if you want to do your best work. So that means, disconnecting, recentering, doing yoga, going out for a hike. Those are all things that I enjoy. So, yeah.
Wow. Yoga and hiking.
Listen, it's where it's at, especially in the DMV. I really like being out here because there's an equal balance of like city life and then nature. So if you want to go hiking out in the mountains, you can have that. You just got to drive a little way.
That's all right. So I want to jump into education. From and you being a classroom teacher, that's a former classroom teacher. That's real cool. And I'm glad that you are, you still feel connected to the space.
Yeah, me too.
From your perspective, what does the K through 12 landscape look like for Black children?
Yeah, this question is I think this question is nuanced for many reasons. Because I think when we talk about the status or the state of Black education, we tend to focus on the negatives, and we use like deficit-based language, which is very detrimental to the Black community. And I myself have been called out for doing this in the past. And sometimes it's just like a sake of being realistic. But I also think that in the same vein, like you have to make sure that you are providing a sense of hope and a sense of urgency for people to really, stay engaged and also try and do better by the system, or try and do better by our students who are in the system. So I have a few facts that I pulled out because I knew I was coming on this podcast, so I wanted to come correct. So there are some schools that are doing great things by their Black students. I know Fortune Schools in Sacramento, California. We actually did some work with Margaret Fortune in the past couple of months, and they have seen some phenomenal achievement rates among their Black students, and it exceeds the achievement rates for some of the schools across the state of California. However, I was pulling some national data, and I think one thing to keep note of is like NAEPS is the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and they release scores every 2 years. So I'm pulling data from the 2017 NAEP results. So when we're looking at the national student average in comparison to the Black student average, for fourth grade reading, it was 222, and then for Black student average, it was 206. For the fourth grade math scores, national student average was 240, and the Black student average was 223. Eighth grade national student average for reading was 267, and the Black student average was 249. And then eighth grade math, the national student average was 283, and the Black student average was 260. So in all of those subjects and in all of those grade levels, Black students are lagging behind. And that is the reality for the way that our students are being tested and taught right now. And then the same thing goes for college readiness levels. I pulled up some data from the ACT report on the 2018 graduating class, and only 6% of African-American students met the ACT college readiness benchmark scores in comparison to the national student average of 27%. 27% is still very low for that to be the national average, but 6% is just absolutely disappointing. And I also think like there's this narrative around like Black parents and family members kind of like being disengaged and disillusioned and not really caring about education, and that's not the case. I know UNCF did a report on building better narratives, which I think all of the listeners should be reading, and it really is talking about how, you know, this is absolutely like false, and this is not the case. Like Black parents really do invest in education in the best way they know how, and they are very adamant about, you know, education being a tool for social mobility and success within their community. So I think like we just all need to, there's a lot of work that continues to be done. And in in the words of Nipsey Hussle, the marathon continues. So like there is a sense of urgency that we need to make sure that we're doing right by our kids. There are schools that are doing great things for our students, but there's a lot more work to be done. And I'm obviously in this work for that particular reason.
What would you say is unique about educating Black children, and where do you see school choice in this conversation?
Well, I think one of the things that is particularly unique, and I'm going to use this quote by James Baldwin because I thought it was really profound, but he once said that educating Black children is a revolutionary act. And I wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. And that's because, you know, educating Black students is, I think, it's certainly it's a beautiful thing. I think it's one of the most challenging things to educate in general. I think teachers have one of the hardest jobs, hands down. I will never disagree with that statement. I think maybe the hardest job after that might be parenting, but educating Black kids in a system that is predominantly white, in a system that's you know, comprised of educators who are mostly white. We have to do a better job of making sure that people who work with students understand and acknowledge Black history and culture, like first and foremost. Like if you're not understanding and validating their identity, there's no way for you to really build that relationship and that strong connection that's going to help lead to better outcomes for them. I also think that working to instill a strong sense of self among Black students is something that is very unique to that group of students, because for so long, they have been in a system that's, you know, that's told them that they're not going to succeed, that they're going to fulfill all the negative stereotypes. And I think we need to do our part in making sure we're dismantling those stereotypes and bringing a stronger sense of identity within our students. And that obviously means, you know, representation and bringing more people that look like them, not just in the classroom, but in school leadership positions too. And then I think, you know, maintaining a high expectations culture and also reinforcing love, tough love, and making sure that your students understand that you are a compassionate and caring and, you know, like no, like not to say no zero tolerance. I don't believe in zero tolerance, but just making sure that you have that no nonsense like sentiment in your classroom that really helps augment like high expectations and success among your classroom. So school choice, I think school choice definitely plays an integral role in this, because they have the opportunity to really innovate and reimagine education for Black kids and for all kids in general. So you think, you know, like with the schools that we have seen whether it's magnet schools, whether it's, performing arts schools or homeschooling or Afrocentric schools. Like, I think they have an opportunity to really help identify what our kids are interested in, and then also help affirm their identity in the programs and in the curriculums that they adopt.
Charters, as we know, they're just catching a bad rap from.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
People who work in traditional public education, and I work in a traditional, public school. I know there are some charters out there doing some great work. There's some charters out there that aren't. And I know some of the pushback is with some of these schools, because they get to choose the students they want, some of them don't take those who have a SPED ruling or those who have certain deficits, academically. But what I see it as is, instead of so many of us talking about equity in education and trying to change a system that way, why not create your own school and make that change that way? Because to me, that is the ownership piece of, we are controlling the education for our students in our community,
right,
as opposed to going to strangers and asking them to love our children as much as we do.
Right. I mean, I agree. I think ownership is obviously like super imperative, especially if we're thinking about like in the education sector. Like, it goes beyond, like I said, being a school leader. It goes into like being a Black CMO, like a charter man, like being a Black-led CMO with the charter management organizations. And I think that's something Roland Martin talks about all the time whenever he does the town hall tours. Like, he wants to go beyond like what we see as Black leadership in education. And there's a lot more that can be done. But when you say like creating our own, like, you have to have support. You have to have support from your own people. And sometimes I don't think that we have that. And I think you also need to make sure that you have policies in place that are going to allow you to create that new system. But right now, like a lot of you, like you said, charters are under attack, particularly Black-led charters, for reasons I don't understand why. And there's a lot that continues to be like, there's so many hurdles. And I think that we just need to make sure that whenever we're advocating for policies, we're looking at how can Black leaders really work towards creating a new system. Like, those are some policies that certainly need reform. And right now, it's become more tumultuous than it needs to be.
I would like to see some HBCUs start creating charters.
Yeah, I mean, I know Morehouse, I think they tried to do it in the past, and I'm not really sure if they're trying to reignite that that passion, but I'm not sure. I agree. I think it would be really nice to see that. But once again, I think that we need policies in place that are going to allow for this to actually come into fruition.
So you mentioned earlier that you are a community manager for an education nonprofit that covers various issues throughout education. What are some of the stories that tug at your heartstrings a little harder than others?
Yeah, there's, like I said, we do national K through 12 reporting. And so there's everything from, education policy related issues to what a local bus driver is doing on behalf of its students that it serves. So it's pretty, there's a wide array of stories that we report on. But I think some of the most compelling ones to me have been stories about educators who go beyond what they're supposed to focus on, who go the extra mile to really focus on like social emotional learning, for example, or focusing on identity and culture. And I think there was this really inspiring piece that I read. It was by I forget the writer, but it was called "Teaching Black Students Love in a System That Doesn't Always Love Them Back." And the title in itself was like, whew, okay, that was kind of tough to, I resonate with me because I completely understand what this writer is already talking about. But more than anything, I think there's so much to be said about educators who go beyond and like are willing to instill that sense of self. Like that's a lot of work, because you also have to be affirmed in your own identity. And then in order for you to do that with your students, you're building connections and making sure that you're respecting their culture and their background, and also, you know, highlighting like the importance of compassion and empathy, and allowing them to take risks and to fail and try again. And I think like those are the things that are super inspiring to me, because it's not an easy task. Like teaching RE is a very difficult profession to be in, like I mentioned, but teaching people, you know, a sense of self, like that's quite daunting. So I'm inspired by people who do it well. And then other stories that inspire bridge the gap between community and their schools. Obviously, like there's a huge push towards community engagement now, and that was clearly something that was embedded in ESSA, the Every Student Succeed Act. But now a lot more schools are taking it upon themselves, especially charter schools, to kind of make sure that they're implementing effective and innovative community engagement strategies that not only engage families and parents, but local businesses, and making sure that the surrounding community is invested in the educational outcomes of the kids, because it directly impacts the surrounding community. So I think those stories are super important and also very compelling.
I've had a great time, Mimi.
Likewise. Thank you again.
You are welcome. You know, I'm just hanging out. I will be going back to work July 15th.
Must be nice. You have a nice month-long break.
Well, you know, you have to enjoy, you know, I have about a month and a half off. You have to, you got to, you know, look, you've been here. So you're there. So you know that you got to have time to just shake it off.
Oh, I believe that. But yeah, you know, go do some yoga, go hiking, disconnect, do all that good stuff.
I'm from Mississippi. I don't know about the yoga and hiking.
Okay, I take that back, especially in the summers. Nah.
The Mississippi summer is absolutely no joke. And it was, I chuckled, you know, because, you know, ISTE is happening, I believe next week. And ISTE is the largest ed tech conference in the world.
Mm-hmm. Are you going to be there?
I am not going this year. I went last year in Chicago. They're going to Philadelphia.
Okay.
I went to the one they had in Philadelphia the other year, but I don't like Philadelphia. So I will not be going back.
Why?
It just didn't seem like it just wasn't one of those cities. I was excited when we left the airport.
Right.
We're in the taxi. We're driving to the hotel, and I'm seeing some stuff. I got a little excited, like, oh, I'm in Philly. I'm gonna, yeah, I'm in Philly. But then, you know, once I got there, the excitement sort of wore off. Now that big market they have, that was cool, a little chaotic in terms of, if you've never been to Philly, it's a very famous market, and you go there and they have eateries.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? It's like
I don't think I've ever been. I went for the first time like 3 weeks ago. So yeah.
Yeah, it's you know, I saw the Rocky statue, the Liberty Bell was, you know, it's still just, it didn't hit me, you know, like certain cities.
Culture. I love that. I think that city is really cute.
For some people, it might just be the dopest city ever. It's certain cities. It's just like with people. Certain things you meet, you see, you feel, and you get that vibe. You're like, man, I want to see that person again. I want to go back to that city.
Right.
And then other things is kind of like, Okay, that was good. And
Listen, don't let Sharif El-Mekki hear you say this, because that's his city. He's ride or die.
hey, we're connected on Facebook. He may listen to this podcast. I just, I may need to go back and kind of purposely
I think you should. I
try
definitely.
to
I need to go back. If that
try
makes
to like, but it's just one of those cities. Like I don't care for New York. Uh, it's just too big and too crazy and too expensive. Now I did live in
a Southern gentleman at heart. Then.
yeah, I lived in Boston for 3 years. I did like Boston. I know they have their racial issues, but I like the fact that it is a big city, but it feels small.
Definitely.
A lot of stuff to do.
Yeah.
But New Orleans is my city.
Yes.
It is phenomenal. The wife and I love to go there, and it's always interesting for us to know that we keep going back and there's still new places to see, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, are we going to ever run out of new stuff? So it is
definitely a gem. I appreciate that city a lot.
My favorite city. So again, thank you for coming on the show. But before we go, what are you learning from your experiences, your conversations with other Black educators, some of the things that you are seeing that are happening within K through 12 that you see as a sign that things are heading in the right direction for Black children?
Yeah. I mean, for starters, I think of schools and, some of the teachers that I've worked with in the past that have started to implement like more culturally responsive curricula to their classrooms. I think that is incredibly powerful, because that also allows students to take ownership of their community and their identities, and also work to, augment and advocate, or augment like the society that they are growing up in, and also advocate for something better. So I think that is incredibly helpful to learn like their histories and identities, and also figuring out like what is their place in this world, and what is the world that they want to see. I think like culturally responsive curriculum really allows teachers and students to dive deep into those types of questions. And also like the implementation of restorative justice programs. I know it's kind of a still fairly new concept, but it's certainly, it helps really reduce the number of like students who are being expelled and suspended at disproportionately higher rates, which it typically happens to Black students, both girls and boys. And I know there was a recent study that came out saying that, Black girls are actually being suspended at higher rates than any other group. Mm-hmm. So when we think about, restorative justice programs, it definitely needs to be organized. It needs a coordinator on each campus that it's planning on being implemented on. It's not just something you can put on teachers. I've been there and it does not work. There has to be a structure built in, and that means that you're also building in funding for that too. I think, another thing that we should also be looking into is like, the innovative charter schools, or even programs that traditional schools are implementing when you're taking into consideration like focus on STEM or STEAM. So I know Digital Pioneers Academy, which is a school out here in DC, they have a curriculum that's completely focused on computer science. One of my really good friends teaches there, and she's a humanities teacher, but she is also learning how to code and with the students, and they have other instructors who had like to go through a rigorous training model to be able to teach this to the students. And they have a focus on like robotics and all these things that it's actually quite inspiring, and it allows you to reimagine education once again, because we don't have to abide by the one size fits all model anymore. So just like that flexibility that we're seeing across some schools, it's pretty inspiring, and allows you to kind of just think beyond that, like what else is there out there that families would find more appealing for their students, because we should be customizing education to really meet each of our students' needs and wants.
Excellent. Thank you for coming on the show, Mimi.
Yeah, thank you again, Dr. Will. This was awesome.
You are welcome. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
And let me know if you have any other questions. And if you're ever interested in writing for the 74, you know where to find me. And also, if you have not subscribed to the 74, it's a shameless plug to go ahead and do that right now.
Awesome. And I'll put a link to the site in the show notes for people.
Totally.
So people, you know how I do this. This podcast is going on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Simplecast. I need you to follow people, subscribe, and leave your comments and some reviews, because your boy's trying to get Oprah on the show, and I want her to know that I am doing big things around here. Come on, Oprah.
Come on.
Yes. I want to thank everyone for checking out the Dr. Will Show, the mobile university for entrepreneurs. And I'd like to thank my guest again, Mimi Woldeyohannes, for coming on. Yeah, hey, I'm trying to do right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it again for coming on the show. People, as always, people, invest in you. EDU. Peace.